She had 24 hours. Not a metaphor, not a political deadline, a real, legal, constitutional countdown. April 25th, Liberation Day in Italy, the day the country remembers being freed from fascism. And on that exact day, Giorgia Meloni's government was about to lose one of its most important laws. Unless she found a way around the one man who stood between her and victory, Italy's President, Sergio Mattarella. This is the story of the 5 days that tested Meloni's government like nothing since the referendum, and the move nobody saw coming. It started with a number, €615. That is how much Meloni's government wanted to pay lawyers, not for defending their clients, for convincing their clients to leave Italy. The security decree, passed in February 2026, contained a clause, a bonus system. Lawyers who persuaded irregular migrants to accept voluntary repatriation would receive €615 per case, paid by the state, tied to results. The government called it common sense. Italy's legal establishment called it something else entirely. The National Bar Council said it was unconstitutional and ethically untenable. The Union of Italian Criminal Chambers called it a betrayal of the legal profession. Their argument was simple. A lawyer works for their client, not for the government. The moment you pay a lawyer to achieve a government outcome, you no longer have a lawyer. You have a government agent wearing a lawyer's suit. And that, they said, violated Article 24 of the Italian Constitution, the inviolable right to legal defence. Think about what that means for a moment. Italy's constitution guarantees every person, including irregular migrants, the right to independent legal counsel. Counsel that answers to them, not to the state, not to the government's deportation targets, not to Meloni's migration numbers. The €615 clause didn't just pay lawyers, it changed what lawyers were. And that, in the eyes of Italy's legal profession and ultimately its president, was the line. April 20th. The Quirinale, the presidential palace, issued a statement. President Sergio Mattarella was paying close attention to the €615 clause. That is the Italian institutional language for, "I will not sign this." Mattarella reportedly called Cabinet Secretary Alfredo Mantovano directly. The message was clear. He could not sign the decree as written. Now here is the detail that nobody outside Italy fully understood. Mattarella is not a figurehead. Under the Italian constitution, the president is the guardian of the republic. He can refuse to sign legislation he considers unconstitutional. He can send it back to Parliament. He can force the government to reconsider. He rarely uses that power, but when he does, it matters. And in April 2026, Mattarella was looking at a law that Italy's own lawyers said violated the constitution, a law that the National Bar Council, the body that governs the legal profession in Italy, had never been consulted on, a law that, in their words, turned defence lawyers into state-paid persuaders. Mattarella had the power to stop it. The question was whether he would. The problem for Meloni was time. The decree had to be converted into law by Parliament by April 25th, or it would automatically lapse. And April 25th was Liberation Day, a national holiday. Parliament would not be sitting. There was no time to amend the clause that Mattarella had flagged, no time to fix it in committee, no time to negotiate with the President's office and rewrite the provision before the deadline. Meloni had a choice. Abandon the clause, lose the win. Let the opposition claim that Italy's president had overruled her government, or find another way. She chose another way. She would pass the decree unchanged and immediately pass a second, separate decree amending the very clause she had just defended. 2 decrees, in the same day. The first to save the law from lapsing, the second to answer Mattarella's concerns. Her critics called it a constitutional mess. She called it a technical adjustment. The difference between those two descriptions is the story of modern Italian politics. On April 24th, Italy's parliament voted. The security decree passed. The opposition did not go quietly. They stood in the chamber. They held up placards reading, "Our security is the Constitution," and they sang Bella Ciao, the anthem of the Italian resistance, written during the Second World War, sung on the eve of Liberation Day, against a law they said was unconstitutional. The symbolism was not accidental. April 25th is not just a public holiday in Italy, it is the day Italy remembers, the day the partisans came down from the mountains, the day the occupation ended, the day the Republic was born. And the opposition chose that exact moment to stand in Parliament and sing the song of those who refused to accept the rules imposed on them. Whether you agree with the opposition or not, you have to understand what that image meant to Italian voters watching at home. Bella Ciao in Parliament. On Liberation Day Eve, against a security decree. That is not a protest. That is a statement about identity. Within hours of the vote, Meloni's cabinet met. They passed the corrective decree. The €615 bonus was extended beyond lawyers to cultural mediators and social workers. Payment would now be made even if repatriation was not completed. The changes were designed to answer Mattarella's constitutional concerns without scrapping the principle Meloni had publicly defended. Meloni spoke to reporters during a visit to Milan's Salone del Mobile furniture fair. "We're bringing together some technical considerations from the President's office," she said. "I don't consider this a mess." Italy's criminal lawyers disagreed. They said the amendments changed nothing, that the bonus system must be repealed entirely, that automatic access to legal aid for migrants facing expulsion must be reinstated. The National Bar Council said it had never been consulted and demanded its name be removed from the administration of the scheme entirely. So who won? That depends entirely on what you think the fight was about. If the fight was about the €615 clause, nobody won cleanly. The clause survived. But it was immediately amended. Meloni passed her decree, but she had to write a second one the same day to fix the first. The opposition sang in Parliament, but the law passed anyway. And Mattarella? He had made his position clear. His office had sent the signal. But the Constitution gives the President limited tools. He can refuse to sign, but he rarely does. He can send the law back, but the government can repass it. What he cannot do is stop a determined Prime Minister who has a parliamentary majority and a ticking clock on her side. That is the reality of Italian institutional design, and Meloni knows it better than anyone. Here is what the opposition is not saying out loud. Meloni walked into a constitutional trap of her own government's making. She passed a decree with a clause her own president flagged as unconstitutional. She had to write a second emergency decree on the same day to fix the first. Italy's parliament voted on Liberation Day Eve to the sound of Bella Ciao, on a law the head of state had serious reservations about. That is not a clean win. But it is also not a loss, because the decree passed. The law is on the books. And by the time the corrective decree works through the system, the story will have moved on. This is how Meloni operates. She does not retreat. She redirects. When the courts ruled against her Albania migrant deal, she found a new legal framework. When the referendum rejected her judicial reform, she reframed it as an establishment attack on her voters. When Trump publicly said he was shocked by her, she absorbed the hit and let the polls respond. And when her own president told her he could not sign her security decree, she passed it anyway, and immediately issued a correction. Every time the institutional wall appears, Meloni finds a door. Sometimes it is elegant, sometimes it is messy, but she keeps moving. In Italian politics, surviving is often enough. And Meloni has now survived a referendum defeat, a public attack from Trump, an insult from Moscow's most powerful propagandist, a constitutional standoff with her own president, and a parliament that sang resistance anthems against her legislation, all in less than 40 days. The question is no longer whether she can be broken. The question is whether anyone in Italy has figured out how. April 25th, Liberation Day. Italy's parliament had voted. The opposition had sung. The president had been answered. And Meloni was still standing. The file is still open. Subscribe to the record room, because the next file is already open.